Hello. Now we are going to check the main line of Berlin defense, which is short castle. And black probably should try to take on e4. There is a bishop c5 move, even I think it was quite popular in the 90s. Well, again, nowadays with computers, it's practically proven, I would say, that white is better here because he can just take on e5. And, well, there is some theory, but I couldn't find any line which can be satisfactory for black after knight takes e5. So whether knight takes e5 then d4, and it seems that a6 is played, bishop e2, and this line knight e4, dc5, knight c5, and white can just play b4, bishop f4, and bishop b2, and it seems that his initiative is very powerful. Statistics is pretty bad for black here of computer games. Or knight takes e5, knight takes e4, but then queen e2, knight takes e5, d4 is strong. And let's say bishop e7, d5, and white is at least slightly better, very easy, comfortable game. So I think that bishop c5 is now totally out of fashion here. It doesn't equalize. We can conclude. So knight takes e4 then is the best move, and the only move probably to fight for equality. And here d4, of course, the main move in this variation in the Berlin defense. But first, let's check rook e1. Actually, quite an unpleasant move to face. Of course, I've played lots of games here and was always a bit concerned. Because here white is completely safe after rook e1. Of course, there are lots of drawish tendencies, and in general, with such a pawn structure, symmetrical pawn structure, it will not be much for white, if anything. But still, black has to be always accurate. Yeah, I mean, I'm sure if black really knows what he is doing, if he is very well prepared, he will probably equalize. But still, you always have to be careful. And I had a lot of games here. And most of the time I would equalize. But still, from time to time, I would get into a slightly worse position after rook e1. So this is a good option for white players if you want to be very safe and still try to squeeze a little bit something out of water, out of the stone. Don't be afraid, because there are many players who tried it, and sometimes they succeed. Sometimes white wins games here, even against very, very strong opponents. So it's not so easy for black to equalize here. And if you are black, I can advise you here really to study it carefully, the theory here, really to know it move per move. What are you going to do? How exactly you are going to equalize? Because otherwise you can end up actually defending a slightly worse, maybe nothing terrible, but slightly worse position for the rest of the game. And this is not something which a player likes to do. Even if at the end of the day he manages to make a draw, still, it's not a great prospect. So that's why rook e1, knight d6 has to be played, knight takes e5, bishop e7. And now bishop f1 is the best move. Well, the old move bishop d3 is totally harmless. It's seemingly active, but of course, white now cannot play d4 anymore, so has to develop very often a bishop via b2 in this variation, and then it's not really harmonious. And there are some attempts, usually takes castle, knight c3. Actually, bishop f6 here is perfectly fine, but the good old style c6 move is okay. Black has only problem the knight on d6 in this position, but is in time to remove it, to play d5, and actually after b3, knight e8, followed by d5, white has some activity, but in fact, actually has to be careful to equalize here. Yeah, I mean, this activity is not leading to a mate or any serious attack, and then this bishop d3, knight c3 with those pawns on c2, d2 might fire back. So not really something I would recommend you with white, to play with white. So bishop f1, and black has, white definitely wants to play d4 here. So black has a choice to play knight takes e5 or knight f5. I've tried both moves a lot, actually played quite a number of games after both of those moves. Knight f5, actually, I think I tried it, this move when I wanted to have a chance to play for a win, at least the slightest chance, even though, of course, white's position is extremely solid, but after knight f5, it can get a little bit more complicated than knight takes e5. And actually, strangely enough, I've managed to win some games with this knight f5 move. But maybe, my opinion, objectively, knight takes e5 is a bit more sound. It's because after knight e5, it's again, if you want to have a certain chance to get a complicated game, maybe that's what I would advise you to choose. But it might not objectively fully equalize. Because here, first of all, the problem is that white can just play c3 here, trying to get d4, and well, black has nothing else to do than to play d6, castle d4, d5, and white is extremely safe here. Black has a better version of the main line of knight takes e5, so here black has absolutely no problem, but winning chances are also not huge. Looking at this position, you understand that it will be very difficult to win, but still. And well, white's main move is knight f3 here, trying to go d4. I mean, d5, d4 castle, and let's say c3. So white is having a bit more harmonious setup, because knight on f5 is a bit, maybe a little bit strange in a way. Knight on c6 with pawn on c7, you know it already that it's not always the best place for the knight. So black needs still some time to regroup his pieces in this symmetrical position. And the plan is to play bishop d6, followed by knight c7, sometimes c6, f6, sometimes even g6, knight g7. So you see the idea that the game can get a bit more complicated here. I played quite a few games here. I think Hikaru Nakamura, he liked a lot to play this knight f5 against rook e1 system, probably with the same idea to get certain winning chances, somehow to get the game a bit more complicated. But yeah, all in all, I was not totally sure if black fully equalizes here, so it might be slightly better for white. A little bit, not much. Well, you cannot expect to be much better in this rook e1 variation, but still white can try there. So that's why most of top players nowadays are just taking on e5, including myself. Finally, after playing a few games with knight f5, I started to take on e5 here immediately. Just I understood that anyways there is very little chance, if you're playing against a top player, to win after rook e1. So at least better to make a very accurately, precisely draw, taking on e5, castling. And now white has a choice of two moves, d4, knight c3. I would say equally popular. Maybe d4 is a little bit more popular than knight c3, but knight c3 is a serious move as well. So the idea is that using this fact that the knight is still on d6, white want to try to get two bishops. For instance, bishop f6, and I think that's what I played against Michael Adams, London, classical chess, maybe again 2012, maybe the tournament was 2012. Rook e1, rook e8, but knight d5, so white actually manages to get two bishops. And even if, that was my plan, to play b6 and then followed by bishop b7, and why black has more, a better development. And in general, of course, it's not much for white. But still, I couldn't really find a clear way to equalize here, because at the end of the day, for instance, queen e3, rook e8, queen f4, let's say queen f5, bishop d2, and finally white will put his pawn on f3, change queens, maybe change rooks. Of course, black must be able to hold this position normally, but he's still on the defensive. Yeah, he still needs to be accurate, and I wouldn't say it's something which is which would worry me a lot if I'm black, but still I wanted a bit more clear-cut solution. So that's why knight e8, and that is a move which is normally played nowadays. Most popular move is knight e8, and now knight d5, bishop d6, rook e1, again c6, knight e3. So a bit strange this play, White's play. His knight is jumping around, but the thing is that after the normal move bishop c7, then knight f5 comes, because black is ready to play d5 and have no problem, but knight f5 and d5, knight e7 check. Finally, after this long maneuver, White manages to get this bishop, and he is having two bishops. It's better to put the pawn on d3 in this position. Again, I've played some games, analyzes this. A computer is always given here, even nowadays, machines 0-2 for White or 0-3 sometimes. In my opinion, actually, it's very safe for black. I mean, okay, of course, White is nominally slightly better, but black has this Capablanca setup, black square bishop, all pawns on White squares, so quite difficult for White to get something really out of this position, but he can still play a bit. So of course it's not 100% equal. So I like to put my pawn on f5, and that's what I would recommend you. I think it's a good plan, because at some point, it's limiting White color bishop and giving black sometimes some active possibilities to play on the king side. And let's say the game develops usually like this: bishop d2, knight f6, queen f3, queen d7. Of course, White can always change, playing bishop f4, exchange this bishop, but that leads to a very just equal position. White is trying to play g3. Sometimes here black has a typical idea of playing knight g4 followed by rook e8. All in all, again, I was not afraid of it as black. I thought it was perfectly safe, but computers are still given a small plus for White. I don't know why, but to me, it's not much. If anything, for White. But nowadays, bishop e7 move is even more popular. So black wants really, not to give even two bishops, not to give a slightest advantage to his opponent. And but still, now the game gets pretty direct. c4 is important move. Knight c7, d4, d5. So black just needs one tempi, bishop e6, and he is fine, but White is just in time to put a little bit of pressure still after cd5, bishop b4, bishop d2, takes, knight d5, queen d5, rook e5, queen d6, bishop c4. Very important to stop bishop e6, and there are some games, still the theory goes on still here. Of course, White is active. He wants rook e1, etc., has some initiative, but very limited material. And I believe that with a precise play, black is managing here to make a draw also. So that is the knight c3 move. But d4, we can say it's a main line. Usually bishop f6 is played here, even though knight e8 is an option also, but bishop f6 is by far the most popular move. Rook e1, there is a move rook e2. Carlsen played it against Karyakin, I think, in the World Championship match 2016. And if I'm not mistaken, Fedoseev have played it against me in Vaikanze 2019. I never considered it as a dangerous move. I'm not sure that rook on e2 is any better than on e1. So rook e1 is the main move. Rook e8 now. And yes, so this is a position. Lots of games on top level as well. Carlsen, he played it a lot, sometimes just to make a draw when it was favorable for him. He would win a tournament with a draw. Sometimes he would try to squeeze something still out of this position, and actually from time to time managing it. But in any case, you have to be careful here with black. You have to know the theory, you have to be careful, because if you mix up some move order, you can end up in, as I've mentioned already, in a slightly worse and comfortable position. But all in all, of course, it's if anything at all, it's very, very little for White, but safe. So c3 is a main move. There is this bishop f4 idea, which became popular for a short while, a few years ago. So the idea is that after rook e1, queen e1, if bishop takes d4, then taking on d6 and playing knight c3, white definitely has enough compensation, at least enough. So usually black doesn't want to go into this position. But in fact, after bishop e5, probably with a very accurate play, black can also equalize. But normally black just play knight e8 here, and then knight c3. This is the idea of the pawn sacrifice. Bishop takes d4, knight d5, d6, and there is some theory. You need to learn some lines here, but now I think it's totally sterilized, and it's already proven that there is nothing for white. And it's a forced draw, or if white is overpressing, he can get worse. So this is already out of practice nowadays. So c3 is usually played, takes on a1, knight e8. So black just develops slowly, trying to get d5, c6. Of course, white in this symmetrical position, white has a couple of extra tempes, and as well as the position of the bishop on f6, which would have been better on d6 after, of course, black manages d5. So white is, of course, pressing a bit, but nowadays there is not much anymore space here because there are so many games played that it's quite difficult to invent some new idea. And if you know the theory here with black, you should be able to equalize slowly but surely in this position. The latest trend was d5. I think it was also played against me by Jan Nepomniachtchi, VKNZ 2019. Well, sometimes black tries to play c6, immediately trying to counter in the center, trying to attack this d5 pawn. I think also d6 is okay. If even b6 is possible. I mean, many ways to play for black. It's has a bit of venom, this d5 move, but no big deal, so to say. Or maybe even queen e7, I think, is another idea, and then changing queens leads to nothing, and I think white was playing queen d1. Strange, looks like the position is totally equal, but there are still some small problems to solve here. But the main line is bishop f4 normally. That's what white plays, d5, and now white has an option to stop bishop f5 because, of course, black wants to develop his bishop now. But then important maneuver is g6, knight d2, knight g7, followed by bishop f5. I myself made few draws like this already. And many other players. So it seems that here there is nothing to catch. Black still need to make couple of accurate moves, but it's just a draw. Lately, white is trying a bit to play knight d2, and after bishop f5, queen e3, trying to go rook e1. And of course, it's a bit more comfortable for white, obviously. It's white has more active pieces, but normally, with accurate play, queen d7 or c6, and some knowledge of the theory, black normally should be able to slowly equalize and make a draw here. So all in all, this variation, a bit uncomfortable. Rook e1 is a little bit uncomfortable for a black player because, practically zero chance to play for a win, at least on the top level, and still some accuracy is required. But once you learn it, once you really know exactly what you do against it, then objectively, of course, it's not going to be a big problem here. So the main move is d4, and in practical sense, obviously the most dangerous move. Knight d6 now. Knight d6, this is the Berlin defense. That is, I think there is a variation, bishop e7 is possible, but okay, that's another story. I think knight d6 is clearly the best move in this position, and the current state of theory is doing very, very fine. I mean, white cannot prove an advantage here. So let's concentrate on this. It's classical Berlin, knight d6. So now white has, d5 is becoming extremely popular now in rapid chess and online chess, but for bad reason. Actually, players just want to make a short draw like this. In fact, it's not necessarily can lead to a draw, because after d, knight b5, it's not a blunder, because white can get this knight back playing a4. There is an option to play c4, but here black is at least equal, probably slightly better. It's much better. a4 is stronger than c4 because here d6, e6. This is the idea of white. Also after playing a4, but here both bishop e6 and knight e5, also f e6, maybe even better, cb knight e7, and here, well, white barely has enough compensation for the pawn, maybe actually not enough, which is a totally different case when after a4, so white has this position, and then the a line is very important here. So that's why a4 is better. And now black can still do the same, d6, but e6 here, this position is already not so easy. Actually it's holdable for black, but most of players, they don't want to go for it because, this rook on the a line is quite dangerous. For instance, like knight f5, trying to develop knight d4, and after exchange on d4, queen d4, already a7 pawn is hanging. Sometimes rook can enter the game via a4. So this position is considered to be dangerous for black. That's why this much safer is to play knight d4. That's what most of top players are playing, knight takes d4. And now the choice is actually how to get, let's say, if we are talking about this position, which all of the chess audience knows very well, I guess, who follows nowadays online tournaments. So black, well, doesn't have anything better than getting here, but the question is how to get there, because on the way, white can try to avoid it. For instance, if you are doing it directly, takes in d5, then white also has an option to play, let's say, queen d3, c6, a5. It has some venom. I mean, of course, shouldn't be anything special, but there is some idea behind it, because there are some small troubles developing, because if bishop e7, there is queen g3 trying to attack the g7 pawn. You can check it. I'm sure black will find ways to equalize, for instance, maybe playing g6 here, but still it's so to say triable from the white side. That's why maybe it makes sense to start with d5 here. And then, for instance, now knight c6, bc6, it's a little bit different pawn structure. Hard to say. If the pawn would have been on a2, maybe it would have been a bit better for white. This pawn structure, just because it's more solid. Here, maybe there is some pressure on the B line. If the pawn is on b3, then maybe some piece can land on b4. All in all, I think it's perfectly playable, just a very unclear position. But playable for both sides. White can also maybe analyze it and give it a try in one or two games. Or even d6 is possible. Here, white's only way to avoid this main theoretical position is to take and play rook e1, d5, rook e5, bishop e6, let's say queen f3, queen d7. Here, black is definitely just fighting for equality, but in fact, probably achieving it. So all in all, if you are playing black, it's your choice. Which of those move orders to choose in order to get to this position. But if white wants to get there, he gets here. And now queen e4 check. This is a well-known. It's already sterilized, this position. If queen e3 check was the main line for quite some time. And after bishop e7, white can still try a little bit. There is some theory here, and it can still try to be a little bit better. But actually, bishop e6 is strong. Knight c3, a6. This is the best way for black to play. In case of rook d1, queen c6, and there is some theory, and but it seems that black is just equalizing has a very clear equality in every line here, so it's basically nothing for white. That's why most of players are nowadays preferring to give a check on e4. And now, the main problem of black that he really cannot. I tried myself because I wanted, if some player of lower level than me tries just to make a draw, and I wanted to find any way to avoid it, but I just couldn't, because otherwise black is just suffering and trying to anyway has zero winning chances. So it's better to play queen e6, and after queen d4 there is no better move than queen d6, which leads to a perpetual. But okay, it's if white wants to make a draw in the opening and you have a decent, strong player in front of you, it's difficult to do something, almost in any opening. So, but we assume that usually white player wants to give it a try, doesn't want to make a short draw. So, by the way, in my practice, I think I haven't have a single game like this. It's not a problem that sometimes there are some lines where your opponent can just force a draw. But this is definitely one of those lines. You can still try, if you want really to play for one, you can still try to play this position. It is risky, but here there is more play, but you need to know, to analyze it and to be sure that you're just not going to get mated very quickly. Because still it's better to make a draw than to lose in 20 moves. Then, what else here? Bishop takes c6 is definitely the main line. Recently, bishop a4 is becoming popular, rather popular. Again, you need to analyze. My feeling is that this popularity is not going to last for too long, because nowadays computers are powerful, and in general, I don't think that this pawn sacrifice can really give white an advantage. But I see some quite strong players, and very strong players like Jan Nepomniachtchi trying this move, bishop a4, and it's still, still black is searching for the most accurate way to get a good position. I'm sure black is not worse here, objectively, but maybe it's this moment of time. Also, I believe white is not worse. It's just a complicated position where white has always enough compensation for the pawn, probably not more. But you need to study it with nowadays with powerful engine, or to wait for somebody like Wesley So, who knows theory very well, who works a lot on chess and using powerful engines, who will just show you the very accurate way to sterilize this bishop a4. Maybe. I think it's very possible that sooner or later it will happen, but for now there are some battles going on here on the top level, mainly in rapid chess, but still, which means definitely that this move deserves attention. So black has two different ways of playing. One is to try to hold the pawn, like e4, rook e1, bishop e7, knight e5, castle, knight c3. So that is, and now probably if black, playing knight e5, he can be slightly worse. So black probably best is f5, and the position is extremely complicated. Black is pawn up, but he has this bad knight on d6, so white definitely has compensation. Both players are in risk, because white, because he's pawn down, central pawn, black, because he has very poor development and coordination of pieces. But so I would advise you, if you go with either color for this position, you better analyze it well. And there is something more, maybe safer a bit, to play ed4 and then c3. This is the idea. So very much this gambit 19th century style. It's advisable for black not to take another pawn, but to play bishop e7, cd4, castles, and knight c3. And black has different options here. I think, for instance, I thought, okay, some time ago, I analyzed it a bit. I actually saw that knight c4 was perfectly fine. Here, I don't know what is what do the new engines say about this position, but my old analysis were going like this: knight c4, d5, knight e5, and something like this: bishop c2, d6, knight d4, rook e8. Very complicated position, very double-edged. I thought that black was doing okay at the end of the day, so maybe dynamically balanced, complicated position. But again, bishop a4, you can try it with white. It's worth if you're playing Berlin with either color white or black. It's really worth analyzing this move because it's fashionable and because the position is very unbalanced. So you better, in such situations, you better be well prepared. So knight d6. Otherwise, yes, bishop takes c6, of course, is the main line. dc6, d5, knight f5. Again, I saw lately even queen e2, which was always considered to be a poor move, but I think Fabiano Caruana played it even in classical chess. So knight d4, that is a problem. Knight d4, knight d4, queen d4. And, it's always what's considered to be almost slightly better for black, but in fact, probably not. Otherwise, definitely Fabiano would have never played it in classical chess. But I still don't believe it can give white an advantage. But you can check it a bit. There are a few games lately on this in this position, but yeah, I'm sure black is doing fine objectively. So still, I believe queen takes d8 check should be played. King takes d8. And let's now talk a bit about this endgame, which is quite familiar to me. So let's have first a general kind of, let me explain you generally how do I see this endgame, certain experience. I will share a bit of my experience because, I played the World Championship match in 2000, and this endgame was one of the key opening positions for me in this match. I managed to hold it well. And after that, I've played a lot this endgame also, sometimes even with white, more with black. And again, here there is a lot of theory. I'm not going to go through all the theory. And since that time, since 2000, it grew enormously. It became almost like Najdorf, the amount of theoretical lines here. But and this you can all study. I will definitely give you some directions, some ideas, which lines are more dangerous or less dangerous for both colors. But my main goal is to try to give you a feeling, a certain understanding of what is going on in this endgame, because this endgame, it's not only about concrete lines or even opening knowledge. You really need to get the feeling here. The endgame is extremely subtle, and even Garry Kasparov needed quite some time to get to the nuances of this endgame. Very, very, in my opinion, very interesting endgame. Very strange and strange position, very special in the whole opening theory. Very special play. Not easy to understand what is going on. Even players with a lot of experience make mistakes and sometimes lose quite badly in this endgame with black and even with white. So I try my best to give you an overview of this legendary endgame, I would say, and probably one of the main theoretical, most important theoretical positions in nowadays top level practice. So, what can I say about this endgame? At the first glance, it looks like black must be perfectly fine here. Because, there are, of course, usually in those type of positions, when the pawn is on e4, it somehow limits the white square bishop, black's white square bishop, and it's maybe strategically more sound for white. With a pawn on e5, all these white squares are becoming, sort of weak, I would say, and potentially this bishop on c8 can become very powerful. And black has this nice square on f5 for his knight, sometimes for the bishop. But the main problem of black here is that it's extremely difficult actually to connect rooks. And in fact, to develop pieces in a certain way that white doesn't start to attack them or to exchange. For example, in these positions, once black wants to play bishop e6 to develop like this, then knight g5 comes, and usually it's a problem, because if white manages to exchange the knight for the white square bishop, then most of the time he is better, unless black has some very concrete tactical, resources. So it's it's very difficult for white to develop his play. So actually, black has time. Black doesn't have to hurry, but still, it's not easy. Not easy. There are many different setups, but in any case, not easy to manage. Let's say the perfect thing: bishop e6, bishop e7, king e8, rook d8, and then double rooks somehow, or change all pair of rooks. Of course, then black would be even slightly better, but it's quite difficult. So black's problem mainly is coordination. White's problem that black has two bishops and no targets really for white here. I mean, so he has his main plan. He has two actually main ideas in this position. One is to try to get e6 sometimes, of course, with exchanging, let's say, knight to f4, rook e1, e6, and quite often it would lead to a better endgame. Still not always, by the way. Of course, his main asset is a better pawn structure. So he has this extra pawn on the queen side. On the king side, sorry. But black double pawns on c line are not that bad, because quite often he plays c5, b6, and somehow pushes. So he gets some play on the queen side often, and sometimes these pawns can get, like taken on d5 or taken on d4 after c5, knight d4, so you can undouble these pawns as well. And so one idea for white is to get e6 at some point, and the main idea basically is to try to push the pawns on the king side, like h3, g4, potentially f4, f5. This is basically the main plan, but easier said than done, because as you see that very often once you get h3, g4, black starts to counterattack with h5, so you have to be extremely careful pushing those pawns, and you will see some examples when it can fire back also. So in my time when I started analyzing this endgame, of course, situation was very different. There was almost no theory, very little theory, and at that time it was more of a strategical understanding of what to do in this endgame. So I tried very different setups, and I tried to analyze it, really in a strategical manner. But now, since engines are powerful, the endgame is very popular, very fashionable, and now there are many lines which start to be already analyzed till the end almost, and move per move. So conceptually, it's changed a lot since 2000. So now if you want to play this endgame, we are talking about professional level, then you really need to know some concrete lines also here. So usually white is playing knight c3. He can start with h3. Sometimes white starts with h3. Probably the only real difference starting with h3 is that in case of bishop d7 variation, if black plays king e8, then probably anyway knight c3 is the best to put the knight on c3. There is nothing better than that, in my opinion. But in case if black is choosing the other concept, trying to put the king on c8, like playing bishop d7, then white has an additional possibility to play rook d1, king c8, and now g4, knight e7, knight g5. Very direct play. Bishop e8, f4, followed by f5. There were many games. I had quite a fascinating encounter here with Fabiano Caruana, I think Moscow 2013, which ended in a draw. There were many other games, Caruana Adams, and I think Fabiano played a lot this move order, tried to fight against the bishop d7 system. All in all, I think, it's pretty unclear, I would say. White has some chances for advantage, but probably black is just in time to be fine here, because you see, of course, if white manages without any problem to put pawn on f5, knight c3, knight e4, king g3, he will be strategically almost winning, but black always gets some h5 or h6, h5, so he's trying to create counterplay against these pawns. Very, very sharp and very direct play. You need to study it. But most of the time, knight c3 is played, and here black... I always thought that black has two conceptually different options here. One is to try to get the king to the queen side. So playing bishop d7, king c8. So more or less the idea is bishop d7. I just show you, let's say, just to show you if white is doing nothing. So what is the plan? The plan is to do this, then to play b6, then at some point to play, I don't know, h6 usually, at some point king b7, and finally rook e8 and bishop e7 and c5 bishop c6 or c5 bishop e6. So that is the plan. Of course, it takes time, to deliver it, but it's one concept. Another concept is to try to get king to e8 So in a way, it's defending the pawn on f7 and having more control on the king side then. But it's more difficult to connect rooks. And king is still a bit stuck in the center. So two different concepts. I think both are playable. So I played both from time to time. I don't know, 50-50 more or less. Also in my match against Gary, I think we had 4 endgames, Berlin endgames, and twice I moved the king to the queen side and twice to the king side. So in my opinion, both are playable. But now there is a third concept which is becoming very popular. And as I see in the latest games, it seems to be doing pretty well, which is to keep the king on d8, something which haven't crossed my mind, frankly, in 2000, and by means of bishop e7. This is now becoming very popular, this move. The idea of h3, which is usually anyway the move white needs to play sooner or later, preparing g4, and now knight h4. Very, very direct way of playing. I mean, the difference is compared to the same variation when black first plays king a8, that sometimes a king can go to c8. I mean, very subtle nuances, but it seems that it's quite important. So this bishop e7, I think in the modern state of theory is doing well, played by many top players like Alexander Grishuk and Wesley So, and you have to pay attention. So whether you play white or whether you play black, I mean, it's maybe the first line to analyze, to try to find what is the situation on bishop e7, because again, if you are white, you have to have something against it nowadays. And with black, if it's doing very well, then white to study all the other lines. But anyway, by the way, studying other lines wouldn't harm you, because it's important to get the feeling also of this endgame. So bishop e7 is interesting. Then, there are some ideas also like knight e7, h3, knight g6, certain ideas to play like this with a king on d8. Let's say rook e1, h6, and trying still to not to make up your mind where do you go with your king finally, to c8 or e8. But I will not go into these details. Usually, black players, they try to also, to play some more straightforward way. I mean, to make up their mind where do they want their king finally, on e8 or on c8. And sometimes doing this kind of strange move orders, it can fire back because you can confuse yourself at the end of the day. By the way, I also played h3, knight e7, bishop d7. So of course, black has many different move orders and certain strange ideas, trying to keep the king on d8 for the moment, and trying to confuse white. But all in all, since it's more of an introduction of this endgame, so I will not have just enough time to cover all those nuances. And in any case, you need a certain understanding of the general structure of the theory of this endgame. And with time, with practice, you will get into those delicate nuances of move orders. So that's why for now I would like to explain you in general the general plans, and let's say to investigate mainly the very straightforward ideas when black is not trying to do something tricky, but just actually makes up his mind quickly whether he wants king on e8 or on c8. And then I will show you what is the state of theory at the moment and what are the main ideas in each of those concepts. So bishop d7, this is the way to, if black wants to get his king to c8, that's what usually he is doing, is playing first bishop d7 in this position. h3, again, as I've mentioned already, it's, most of the time, 90% of cases, this move is necessary anyway, because white is preparing g4. There is an option to play rook d1 here. So the idea is, if now black gets his king to e8, of course, rook on d1 is not so well placed. I mean, it probably would have been better to get another rook to d1 and this one to e1 at some point. But also black has played bishop d7, which is a bit dubious, not clear if it's really standing better than on c8. So now maybe white can play h3 or bishop f4. That is can be a bit better for white. So that was not the black's plan. So the idea is, of course, to play king c8 and now knight g5. That's the point of the rook d1. So which forces black to put his bishop on a8. Not really what he wants to do normally. b3. And the idea is, in case of h6, then white wants to get the knight to e4, bishop to b2, and then maybe start pushing pawns. That's why I believe the most accurate is actually not to hurry with h6. That is quite important, is to play b6, bishop b2, and bishop e7. Now you don't need h6 anymore. And in fact, the idea is that after knight e4, you can start with king b7, because on g4 there is knight h4, and then probably you will put immediately pawn on h5 and finally start exchanging rooks, like rook d8. There is quite some theory here. It seems that black is okay in this position. White, some strong players tried to get something here with white, but didn't really manage. So that's why h3 is the main move. And now black has a choice of whether playing h6, which was a kind of almost forced main line, and that's what I played, by the way, in my match against Garry Kasparov. But lately, of course, with the help of engines, bishop e7 became popular and maybe even considered to be the most accurate move here. The thing is that king g8 is not working so well here, because then g4 comes and knight g5. So this idea, bishop e8, f4, and this is already a really dangerous version, because white is practically tempi up compared to, you remember this variation with rook d1 after h3, bishop d7. So rook is not worse on f1 than on d1, and the knight is already developed on c3. So I believe here white is just better in this position. That's why king c8 is not an accurate move. So before moving his king, black needs to do something about this potential knight g5 idea. h6 is the most logical move. So black wants his plan, king c8, b6, etc. And because again, g4, this straightforward way of playing knight e7 is not easy to arrange f4. Because black has his counterplay. He wants very often h5. Then if knight d4, c5 sometime comes. g4 is premature here. I think the best in this type, when the king is going to c8, that was my understanding of this position, then probably white's best is to develop the bishop to b2. Why? Because black has less control on the, as I've mentioned already, on the king side, when his king is on the other side of the board. And now white is quite often starting to be threatening e6. What I mean is, like, let's say king c8, bishop b2, and so one of the ideas is to play knight e2, knight f4, and then rook e1, e6. And the bishop on b2 is actually, there is a lot of pressure on the g7 pawn and on the queen side. While at the same time, when the king goes to e8, I considered already b3, bishop b2 plan is less dangerous. So that is my understanding of this endgame. And it's proved, because of the practice, and most of the players, in case the king goes to c8, are trying to play b3, bishop b2 here. And again, I remember I played b6 here against Garry Kasparov. Of course, the theory was only developing at that time. Actually, the whole plan of bishop d7, king c8, first time appeared a few months before my match, just in one game. I think Zoltan Almashi tried this plan. I found it interesting. I analyzed it a bit. So there was basically no theory at all. So we were discovering it, the theory, the main ideas of this position, because before, basically automatically black would move his king to e8, always in Berlin defense. There is some point of playing a5. There are a lot of kind of delicate move orders here. Once you start to go deeper into this endgame, study it on your own, check the games of strong players, you will start to understand all those nuances. But the mainly b6 is played, rook ad1. So you see white is actually trying to stop black from developing. Not easy for black to what to do, because if you play bishop e6, then knight e2 comes, and actually knight f4 is very unpleasant threat. And as I've mentioned already, usually if white manages to exchange this bishop, then he is better. Also, maybe bishop e6 is not so good because of this idea, knight d4, so the bishop gets, under attack, and if bishop d7, f4, and f5 is coming, very dangerous for black. So I think I've played knight e7, if I remember well here. That was my defensive idea. So black wants to play c5, covering the d5 square. And in case if knight goes to e2, then I think my idea was I tried to play knight g6, stopping knight f4, and then again wants to play c5. So I'm really trying to take care of the e6 idea. So for example, if white goes knight g3, by the way, another typical idea for white to get the knight on h5. Not always it's so dangerous, but you can actually probably even ignore it, playing like c5, knight h5, bishop e6, followed by king b7, rook g8. Sometimes it can be a bit tricky, this knight on h5, somehow holding the bishop on f8. But maybe black has enough counterplay with a5, a4 on the queen side. But also sometimes knight f4 is another idea here. And let's say if bishop c1, knight e6, and then c5, etc. Okay, I understand it's if you are not very familiar with Berlin endgame, it looks all very complicated and strange. But that is a Berlin endgame. It's very subtle, and a lot of accurate moves are required here for, especially for black, but also with white, because you can also get worse with white here, especially when the king goes to c8. So if black manages his plan, let's say c5, king, bishop e6, king b7, knight g6, bishop e7, rook d8, and he has two bishops, and especially once you already put your bishop on b2, which is, basically limited by the e5 pawn, you better make sure that you whether play e6, whether you manage to push your pawns at some point, because otherwise you also risk to get a bit worse, with white. But I think later I analyzed this position. I didn't like knight e7 because of knight d4. I found that knight d4 was quite an annoying move. Of course, white just wants to play rook e1 and e6, and during the match I saw that c5 was just fine, just losing a tempo. But then knight e2, and it's not easy for black to coordinate his pieces. This e6 idea is becoming quite dangerous. So for instance, if I play, bishop e6, as you already know, there is always knight f4 coming. If I put the knight on g6, then all sorts of f4 ideas, f4, g4 coming. So I saw that this knight d4 is quite dangerous against knight e7. And lately, the main move in this position is c5. Again, in 2000, I was really afraid to play c5, just letting the knight get into d5 and pawn on c4. And it's true, it's risky, but actually it's also pretty direct. Also, the idea is of c5 is that if knight d5, black is just in time to get a5, to get his counterplay on the king side. And that is the whole point. If white would just manage to stop with a4 and c4, let's say play two moves, and the knight is already on d5, I think it would be simply better for white, but he's not in time, because after a5, so in case of c4, black plays a4, and it's very important in this type of position to get this counterplay on the a line. So which is really bothering white very much all the time. This AB, rook a2 potential idea. So, and in case of a4, very important that black is in time to play c4. Basically, it's an only move in this position, because, for instance, if black plays something like bishop c6, leaving white the chance to play c4, which is blocking the queen side. And then white will start his rook e1, e6, g4. Black actually is in quite difficult position. So in general, again, as a concept, c5 normally is not a great move when the knight is on c3 in such positions. So when I was studying in 2000 those Berlin endgames, and it was basically an unknown territory completely, I always thought that you should only play c5 with black only once white moved his knight away from c3. Let's say, just to show you, let's say rook g8, of course, not a good move, but just to show you the idea. So once white is playing knight e4, knight e2, then already c5, because then the main idea for white is anyway most of the time to maneuver the knight to d5, and then white would lose a couple of tempists doing so. So in general, c5 is not a good move, but here it's very important that it works tactically. So you see in this endgame, well, especially if you're playing on professional level, it's not only enough to know the ideas, which is, by the way, very, of course, important. And that's why I'm showing you the theory here, not only to, for you to learn some concrete variations, theoretical variations in Berlin, but also to understand the typical ideas. Yeah, so, but it's not enough only to know the typical ideas. You need also to, of course, preferably to know as much as possible theory in Berlin endgame, and also to calculate variations over the board. Because, for instance, here, so a4, so that would be a big positional mistake for black to do so. But here exactly, black has c4. Yeah, and that is very important, because if b takes c4, then the pawn on a4 is hanging. That is a justification of this c5 move. And then black can take on b3 and undouble his pawns. The bishop starts to work, sometimes getting to c5. There is still quite some theory here, and it still things are not so easy for black, but it seems that it's holding. Black is holding here quite well. So that's why c5 became fashionable at some point, and there was a very important game, not only in a sense of for the world of chess, in the sportive sense, but also showing a lot of very important ideas in this position, which was Carlsen Anand. It was 11th, I think, game of the World Championship match in Sochi. I actually, if you are interested in this particular variation, this position of Berlin endgame, I would really recommend you to study it carefully. Very important game. That's why Magnus have played rook e1, because he knew that knight d5, a5 seems to be okay for black. And now what is important, that of course if black plays a5, then white would just go a4, and the point is that after c4 you can always probably, I guess, take on c4. The pawn is not hanging on a4. So that's why rook e1, just playing a very useful move. Because you know already that there is a plan knight e2, knight e4, e6. But now black is just in time to manage what he wants to manage. Another plan in this position is to play bishop e6, and after knight e2, or of course knight d5 is more logical, then black is in time to play g5. So that is the idea. He's securing the bishop. As you know already, if white would just have time to play knight f4 and take this bishop, he would be better simply. But g5. And so now the game continues in a very logical manner. c4, king b7. Of course, white can start with g4, but still after knight e7, the white's plan in this position, because he has not so much to do else than to try to put the king on g3 and play h4, try to break through on the king side. So Magnus started with king h2. This or that way it gets to the following position: g4, knight g6, king g3, bishop e7. So of course knight takes e7 is not too dangerous, because this knight on d5 is main asset for white in this position. So if he's changing it, then things are okay for black, because you shouldn't also play in white. If you shouldn't forget that those pawns, one day if bishop just gets to c2, all those pawns are collapsing. So white also has to be careful. And so Magnus played knight d2, also very logical way of playing. Another idea is to play knight f6, and I assume that it might be that Vishy would have done something similar that he did in the game, a similar plan. But knight d2, so Magnus wants another knight to f6, rook d8, knight e4, bishop f8, very logical plan. Now everybody is, improving his position. And the very important point now, I think Magnus should have played bishop c3. Maybe it was a bit more accurate, but still Vishy could have done the same as the same plan, and it's very important plan in this position, because otherwise, even if it's very difficult for white to break through in this position, but then black is extremely passive. Yeah, so black is just waiting and hoping that white will not find a real plan to improve his position. But Magnus, he went knight f6, and I guess he's preparing f4 probably here, something like that, starting his play on the king side. But a very important resource is b5, very important move. So the idea is that in case of AB, there is some a4, I guess, coming. Yeah, so black starts to create counterplay against white's pawn. Not an easy thing to see. But it seems that black is just in time, like often in Berlin, just in time with his counterplay. And actually Magnus played bishop c3 here. He didn't take this pawn, and ba king c6. And in fact, Anand was already slightly better in this position. Even if he lost the game finally, okay, he had to play for a win. He took too much risk at some point and lost the game, but black is already, it's very, very important that he gets this counterplay on the B line. And that makes, and also the c4 pawn becomes weak, so impossible practically to get f4. So black is more than fine in this position. Therefore, maybe bishop c3 was more accurate prophylactic move against b5. But actually doesn't really stop b5. Still is possible. b5, ab c6 now, for instance. bc king takes c6, the knight is hanging. I mean, black just wants to take back the pawn on d5. And when the knight retreats, let's say to f6, then again takes a4. So black is in time again to organize enough counterplay for equality in this position. So a very, very important game, but still the position is rich. I mean, very, very subtle position. So h6 line, I would say, is, well, it's not refuted. It's perfectly playable, but it's also not bulletproof, so to say, line. Yeah. So I would say, in general, this variation when you are trying to put the king to c8, I mean, to get him to c8, b6, king b7. Of course, it's a very harmonious way of connecting rooks. And in this line, sometimes actually black also has his winning chances. But at the same time, it's more risky than all those variations with a king on e8, which we'll going to consider later on in this lesson. So yeah, it's a choice. Yeah, it's I think that if you are playing Berlin, yeah, I was actually playing both. Yeah, so I would play sometimes king to c8, sometimes king to e8, depending on circumstances, depending on the tournament situation and on my opponent. But the line in general is perfectly playable. And then later on, I even started to play actually another move here, which is also I find interesting, and I want to draw your attention to this move, which is b6. A very subtle move order. So the idea is that I want first my opponent to clarify his plans. Yeah, so I want him to make a certain move. Because again, yeah, if you remember, after h6, white's probably best setup is to play like this. So he's not losing a single tempi. He's trying rook d1 and then maybe trying to go knight e2, knight f4, rook e1, etc. So b6, the idea is that I mean, if I want to play king c8, king b7, anyway, b6 is always useful. Yeah, and I want. In case of b3, if white is preparing and doing the same thing as in the previous line, then my plan was already to play something like this: bishop e7, bishop b2, and maybe h5. Even sometimes moving my king already to e8. But actually h5. So I'm trying to manage without h6 here. So another setup, and it seems that there was, for example, there was a game, I think Almasy Ilyanov, and it seems that black is doing okay here. Rook a d1, king c8, knight e4, for instance, bishop e6. I'm not sure it is the only way of playing, but even this was actually quite okay for black. a4, king b7, rook d3, c5, and here, well, black has already connected the rook, and what is very important in this type of position, that, just to show you the idea, that the bishop on b2 obviously is pretty passive, but it's difficult to, in fact, to activate this bishop, because one day white is playing, let's say, bishop c1, trying to get this bishop to g5, then of course here rook d8 is also possible, but actually knight d4 comes here, and white starts to have problems with those pawns. The knight is good on d4. So that is the idea of b6. Yeah. So after b3, I'm trying to manage without h6. And there are some other options for white. Again, if white plays rook d1, then already king c8, and it's a wrong rook, so to say, on d1. So in case of b3, I can follow up first of all with bishop e7, but even already h6, and then it's not the best rook on d1. Yeah, I guess I can also play bishop e7 here. So that is the idea. And in case of g4, now that is important, that knight e7, knight g5, another typical dangerous idea for black. But now I already play king e8. That's why black left his king on d8 for a while, just to have this option to play king e8, and after f4, trying to get f5, just in time to play f6. And actually, this position takes knight e4, king f7. Yeah, I analyzed it. I think it's okay for black here. Then he's trying to play knight d5, and it's pretty equal, complicated position. It's all very, very subtle and difficult, I understand, for you, all those move orders. Again, we are talking about a very high professional level. I think for those players, all this will make a lot of sense, and it will be very useful, all those concrete move orders. For more amateur level players or club players, I think that anyway, of course, it's very useful, but even if you will not remember all those move orders exactly, what is very important also, that you get this idea of typical maneuvers, typical nuances of the position. So again, this endgame is very, very delicate, so to say, very subtle, and you need to a smallest change of move order or change of plan can actually have a very big impact on the assessment of the position. So, okay, bishop d7, that was the plan, trying to get the king to c8. Now let's consider when black is playing king e8 in good old fashion. So of course it's much safer, because the king is also sort of protecting the pawn on f7 and the king side in general. But black, it's a bit more difficult for black to coordinate his rooks, with the king on e8. So he doesn't have a very clear plan like king c8, b6, king b7, rook d8. So matter of taste, again, it's a bit safer, I believe, for black. I mean, you will not get too bad position with the king on e8. It's also, there is no bulletproof equality here as well. So, I mean, there is according to theory, but white still has ideas, white still can try. So usually h3, I think it's the best move. I mean, I would recommend you to make this move anyway, because, again, as I've explained already, it's a strange position, strange endgame, where in some way, both sides are making useful moves at the beginning and waiting for his opponent to show his plan. and then trying to set up pieces, trying to react accordingly. So that's why it's this move h3 is extremely useful, because one of the main ideas for white in this endgame, sooner or later, to try to push pawns on the king side, and you need h3. Yeah, you need h3 just to be able to play g4 and later maybe f4. And because, for instance, if you now with a king on e8, by the way, this plan with b3, I think it's already quite harmless, because black can play bishop e7, bishop b2, for instance, bishop e6, followed by rook d8. That is one of the things I want you to remember, to know that b3, bishop b2 plan usually is dangerous, pretty dangerous when the king goes to c8. Otherwise, especially immediately after king a8, it's probably not a big deal. So I wouldn't recommend you to do this. So now let us consider another logical move, for instance, bishop f4. Again, to my taste, it's a bit too early, just showing exactly the plan, because sometimes, for instance, the knight might go to f4. So that is quite a good example why maybe h3 is the best move, in my opinion, just because it leaves more options. Because now black can easily play bishop e6. As you know that, for instance, with a pawn on h3, bishop e6 is quite dubious, because white has knight g5 and also g4, knight d4 ideas. So here bishop e6, again, there is knight g5 is more dangerous already, and also after bishop e6, g4, knight d4, it's possible, because again, h3 you see is very useful. The pawn is not hanging on g4, so white can try knight d4 and bishop retreats probably, and maybe f4, f5, something of this sort might be quite dangerous. For instance, here after bishop f4, bishop e6, not the only move, but very logical, because now after g4, knight e7, again, the same plan already, the pawn is hanging on g4. So that makes a big difference. And I guess if knight g5, black has bishop c4, attacking the rook, and then h6. So bishop e6, let's say rook fd1, and now, for instance, h6, again h3, you see sooner or later white is playing h3, but then probably better to do it immediately on move 10. And here black has, for instance, bishop b4 is the main move in this position. Also, actually, bishop c5 makes some sense. A little bit strange, but after g4, knight e7, so the idea is to develop the bishop. Knight a4, bishop b6. By the way, one of the very important strategical ideas of this position, especially with a king on e8, that black is most of the time, especially if he gets h6, bishop e6, he's happy to exchange his black square bishop against white's knight. Like this, or sometimes playing bishop b4, bishop takes c3 if white allows it. Usually it's in black's favor, so don't be afraid of playing black if you have this type of setup to exchange this bishop for the knight, the black square bishop. So that is a little strange to put bishop on b6. In general, not recommended in this Berlin endgame, but here it works tactically, it seems to be okay. Or bishop b4, which is also a theoretical move. And now again, black is well developed, and as often happens here, is tactically actually managing to coordinate his pieces. For instance, if white is playing g4, knight e7, now knight e4, then bishop d5 is very unpleasant, because there is no e1 square for the rook. And let's say if black plays knight d2, then, as we know already, exchanging this bishop, especially since white has to take with a knight on d8, that shouldn't be any problem for black. He can play rook d8, bishop e6, etc. It's pretty okay. So all in all, I hope this small example was instructive to explain why h3 actually is commonly played. It's by far the main line in this position. And now after h3, well, black has all sorts of moves, lots of moves. Even move like a5 is actually possible. A little too abstract to my taste. I doubt it's going to be equalizing, but even this move is possible. Otherwise, I think practically all moves were tried already in this position. Well, let's start with bishop e7. which is, very logical way of playing, of course, just developing the pieces. Actually, I think I played it practically, it was the first time it was played on the top level. I played it against Garry Kasparov in 2001, already after the match, Vaikenze 2001. And Garry played bishop g5 against me, which actually probably is not too dangerous. Finally, I was still suffering a bit. I managed to make a draw, but here I don't think that bishop g5 is the main attempt. G4 is very important move, and the knight h4 takes. And here, again, it's a strange position, strange line, opening line, because I think in general, if white manages a setup, which I'm going to show you, I think he's, it's very unpleasant for black. I mean, maybe he can hold the draw, maybe not. There was a very important game, which I'm going to show you now, part of it, which Yakovenko against Yang Yu, or Wang Yu, I don't remember exactly. Actually this Chinese player was making lots of draws in this endgame, and then Yakovenko analyzed it and managed to find the correct plan and posed problems in this endgame. But the point is how to reach it, because there are different move orders, and Yakovenko started with rook d1 here, and maybe it's he thought it was the most accurate move order, because you can start with king g2, then h5, nf3. Probably I think it is okay. Why not to start like this? I don't know, but probably he had something in mind, because for instance there was a game Adams Wang Yu, and it was bishop e6, bishop e3, and finally bishop e7, knight e2, rook d8, rook fd1, and we will see, by the way, this position actually in the Yakovenko game. So maybe it's a bit more accurate move order. You have to check really. But Yakovenko played rook d1, and Wang Yu anyway played bishop e7, so he wanted his setup. But maybe I saw recently a game when Wesley So played against Grishuk, I think in Rapid Chess. He played h5, which was supposed to be g5. I think that is the idea of Yakovenko, because now he is threatening rook d4. And probably after f6, he thought that this position, takes, knight e4, fg, bishop takes g5, takes. It looks quite dangerous for black, But I don't know, Wesley So played king e7 and actually rather quickly managed to equalize and make a draw. So maybe this h5 is interesting. Again, it's about the move orders. But let's say if white manages what he wants, so this h5, f3. So this is a kind of tabia position, bishop e6. And now it seems to be actually quite almost harmless, But in fact, white found a very unpleasant plan here, and I wouldn't say that it's winning, of course, but it's no fun for black to play this position. Knight e2, let's say rook d8, bishop e3. This is a a6, a game Yakovenko against Wang Yu, and also Adams against Wang Yu. Knight f4, g6. So that was a setup of the Chinese player. He just wanted to give check. White has probably nothing better than to takes, and he thought that this endgame actually, because sooner or later it will get to a bishop endgame, and he thought it was a draw. I mean, almost by miracle, but a draw. But in fact, I remember the story Yakovenko told in his interview. So it was something of this sort, the game, and he said that he actually started to analyze this bishop endgame, and basically the final position he had on the board, which I think the game lasted 54 moves. He had it in his home preparation. Actually, he analyzed this bishop endgame, and he found some study-like way to win it. That actually it's not a draw, but it's a win for white. Well, anyway, it has not much to do with, I would say, practical chess, so basically the whole game was played out of preparation. But in any case, this is a little sad. This bishop e7 system is really like trying just to fight for a draw. But who knows, maybe it's still not so easy for white to, maybe if black, especially I mean, this position I really don't recommend you to enter because you're just praying, to make a draw and there is no guarantee. But maybe all those move orders, you can find something with move orders not to get into this position, like h5, g5, f6. All in all, not a very popular system, too passive somehow. What else? There is a bishop e6 move here also. Actually, it's not refuted. I've mentioned already this move earlier. Not refuted, but again, not very popular because white has a choice of playing rook d1. It's something I would recommend you to play with white if you don't want to study long force lines. Quite a dangerous move, but actually g4 is really dangerous, so it's getting pretty forced here. Knight e7, knight d4. Again, as you know, if I manage to take the bishop, I will be just better with white. So bishop d7, f4, a typical, very aggressive plan. And now h5, f5, hg, hg. And of course, if white just managed to develop, he will have a huge advantage. I mean, simply black cannot move. Yeah, he has no space. But rook h4, there is some tactical resource. Rook h4, rook f4. And now knight d5. Knight takes d5, c takes d5. At least black managed to change one pair of knights tactically. And after knight f3, rook h8. There is still a lot of theory here. It goes on and on. I mean, black's position is clearly incredibly dangerous. I mean, looks really bad, but as always, with the help of computer, he manages in most of the lines at least to survive somehow. Maybe even in general it's holdable, but a very risky line. White has quite a number of options even in this position, and there is no guarantee that you are not going just to lose by force. You need to memorize lots of very direct computer like variations, and still with actually the reward will be at best a forced draw. So all in all, a bit dubious line, even if, again, if you like it, you can study it. It's as far as I know, it's not refuted yet, but not to everyone's taste. Then what else? There is a old, a bit forgotten move, knight e7 in this position. So this is a plan which was very popular, many years ago, like 50 years ago. Basically, that was the way black would usually play Berlin. So he would try to maneuver his knight to g6, just as a prophylactics against g4, just to stop white from pushing his pawns very quickly on the king side. It makes sense, of course, because knight on g6 is kind of bothering the pawn on e5 and leaves the diagonal for the bishop, and now you don't have to worry about these g4 ideas. But it's also a bit slow. And again, it's almost disappeared from the tournament practice now. And in fact, to get something with white here, you really need to know very well what you are doing against this move. It's a very principled actually move, and if I can also recommend you with black sometimes as a surprise to study it, maybe to play, because again, if white doesn't know it well, you can equalize very without problems. But I think in the main line black is experiencing problems. So rook e1, or you can start with knight e4, knight g6, rook e1, or rook e1, knight g6, knight e4. I think this is a very important position of this variation. And now, the black's problem is that he cannot really develop comfortably in here. For instance, if he's trying to play bishop e7, very logical move, but the problem is knight f6 check, so tactical. That's why basically you need the rook on e1 in this position. Knight f6 check, and if takes, then white takes back the bishop on e7 with a big advantage, obviously. And in case of king f8, very unpleasant is knight h5. So, that followed by g4, slowly king h2, king g3, pushing pawns. The rook on h8 is really out of play, and here white is simply better, so bishop e7 is not recommended. Then another way to develop bishop e4, then again, first of all, knight g5, bishop d5, e6 has to be checked, looks very dangerous, but also knight d4. knight d4, bothering this knight bothering the bishop on e6, and in case of bishop d5, white has a very annoying move b3, just trying to play c4, rook d8, bishop b2, and it seems that c4 is a serious threat. Also, sometimes knight f5. There is also quite some tactics in this position, with a king on e8, all sorts of tactical ideas. For instance, after knight f4. Trying to, in case of c4, to get the knight maybe to d3 at some point. But then e6, also very typical idea here with rook on e1 and king on e6, and king on e8, e6, and in case of knight e6, knight g5, threatening c4 at the same time. So it looks like black is having serious trouble. Black is worse here. So that's why another idea is after knight e4, c5. You remember I've mentioned it was in the line with the king on c8, but I mentioned this idea that once the knight is going out from c3, going to e4, e2, black already quite often plays c5, and then white needs time to get back to d5 with knight c3, knight d5. And actually, this move would have been not bad at all, but and it was played, it was quite popular at some point of time. But then white, I guess with the help of computers, found a very tactical, very dangerous refutation. I mean, very dangerous move h4. And it seems that after h5, let's say bishop g5, this bishop is very powerful on g5, and a lot of tactical ideas coming. It seems that white is better. And in case of bishop g4, white has knight h2. That is very important. And bishop e6, h5. And taken on e5 doesn't work. I will show you this a little later in the similar line. And in case of knight h4, for instance, g4 followed by f4, and white is just much better. So c5 would have been not a bad move at all, if not h4. This is an important move to remember. And that's why finally h6 is the main line here. So making a useful move again, waiting for white to clarify his plans. And but here the idea is that in case of knight d4, also by the way, typical idea, once the knight is already away from f5, to play knight d4, because you cannot really take on e5 because the knight will be pinned. I mean, something like knights going somewhere and then f4 or f4 immediately. So this is a mistake. But then black has c5, because otherwise white's plan would be, let's say, if black is playing something like bishop d7, also just to play f4, and in case of c5 already knight f3, and then trying to push g4, f5. Quite dangerous actually. But c5 is possible, and that is the idea of h6 actually, that after knight b5 black has king d7. A very strange way of playing, but actually black king goes to c6 now, where it's standing pretty well, and there was some games here black is doing fine, and you need actually h6 here. Otherwise, if black pawn would have been on h7, white would have knight g5 move here, attacking the f7 pawn. Actually, that is one of the main ideas of h6 move, is to have c5 after knight d4. b3 is quite a dangerous move, also a very serious move, but maybe black can hold his own playing b6. So preparing this plan c5, bishop b2, c5. Let's say the play can develop like this: rook a d1, bishop e6. Finally, when white doesn't have knight d4 idea, black's pawn is on c5, so he can put his bishop on e6. Now white is also making this typical maneuver, getting back the knight to d5. Again, if you cover this square on d5, then I come back, and now d6 square becomes weak, so the knight starts to get to d6. So you cannot have it all with black. I guess in case of rook d8, the problem is knight b5. Also quite tactical. The pawn is hanging, and a7 is also hanging. So rook d7, otherwise everything would be fine, if not the pawn on a7. Just you're losing the pawn. So usually black is trying to play bishop e7, knight d5, bishop d8, like this, and then slowly trying to maneuver in a similar fashion of this king c8 variation. Of course, I would have preferred definitely my king on b7 in this line, but still maybe this position is not too bad for black. So it's still not totally sure, frankly, but I'm more worried about a4 move. A very subtle, very subtle move. What is the idea of a4? The idea is that in case of course, if b6, so in a way it's sort of prophylactic against b6 because a5. Yeah, I want immediately to start attacking on the king side. In case if you play a very typical move a5 after a4, then it's very difficult to get c5 because the knight will be on b5. So now already knight d4 comes. And the very big difference is after c5, knight b5, king d7, without a4, a5, black would just be playing king c6, attacking the knight, a6. Here you cannot really get rid of this knight on b5, and white is better here. Then what else? Bishop d7, another way of playing, trying to go rook d8 maybe. Then again knight d4 already possible, and after c5, knight b5. Very important, that's why a4 is played. So you see how subtle actually is play here. So you need really to have a lot of experience and knowledge, understanding of this endgame to play it really precisely with either color. And then a4 c5, that is another way of playing, just trying to play bishop e6 next. But now again tactical, yeah. Otherwise, let's say if white just plays a5, probably after bishop e6, well, maybe still a bit dangerous, bishop e3, but maybe b6, maybe black can like a, b, c, b, a bit risky, but maybe black can hold here. Also, bishop d5 move maybe has to be checked. Some tactical ideas, but actually, in any case, h4 here is very strong. That is again the same idea as you saw immediately after c5, and it's still very strong because bishop g4, knight h2. Again, yeah, otherwise h5 is a threat, and actually the problem after h5 is that it's difficult for black to get his coordination because of all these tactics as usual. Here, I guess this h5, let's say knight f8, and then knight d6 check, knight f6 check. Yeah, these tactics seems to be maybe, for instance, here already. Well, f6 is also good, and then white seems to have too much initiative here. Well, at minimum initiative, actually just being better. So after h4, bishop g4, knight h2, bishop e6, h5, and yeah, the problem is of knight takes c5 that f4 comes, and in fact knight c6, f5, black is in trouble here. So you see, well, you need to be quite tactical often in this endgame in order to achieve some strategical pluses. Like, for instance, you need to see that knight takes c5 doesn't work. And then if it doesn't work, let's say black is playing knight h4, then you're already strategically better. Playing g4, let's say rook d8, f4, and finally king f2, king g3. This position is simply pretty bad for black. He's not in time to create counterplay, and white is pushing his pawns. So all in all, knight e7 is a very logical system, but white has really to know very well what he is doing. But for the moment, black is experiencing problems after knight e7. Then b6, actually a very strange move, but I found it in 2001. Actually, I was preparing for a match against Garry Kasparov, not the match which I played in 2000, but we played a shorter 4 games match in Moscow in 2001, and I wanted some new idea, maybe to invent some new idea against Berlin, and I found this b6. I haven't played it, maybe wrongly so, because actually it's not a bad system. Because I thought it was not good enough for classical chess, and finally I played it many years after in some Blitz World Championship. I played many games with b6 with a lot of success, because it's quite tricky, this move. But I knew that actually rook d1 is a very annoying move. It's definitely the best move after b6. And that was the reason why I didn't play it, because I knew that rook d1 is unpleasant, but maybe not as unpleasant as I thought back then in 2001. Well, the idea is that why rook d1, because let's say if white is playing a logical move, something like bishop f4, then black has bishop b4. It's a tactical idea. Why b6 was played? Because now, for instance, if knight e2, black has bishop a6, and actually this pin, you're just having a problem losing material after that. Then if knight e4, also bishop a6. That is one of the reasons of b6, is to have this tactical idea. And in case of rook d1, black has bishop e2 move. And or let's say rook c1, black can play rook d8, or maybe still bishop e2 even. I think I've had a blitz game against Alexei Shirov and I won it playing like this. So yeah, if white plays rook e1, then bishop b4 is already good. As I mentioned, it's very good for black to change this bishop. So normally with a rook on f1, white would just remove his knight. Here, because of the pin, he has to play bishop d2, and now black would maybe go bishop e6 or something. Then simply, let's say a3 just takes and plays c5, and black has no problem whatsoever in this position. So all in all, I would recommend you with white to play rook d1, and I thought it was really better for white. But then lately there were games, and maybe it's not so simple. For instance, bishop b4, strange move bishop b4 becomes quite fashionable. I have my doubts it fully equalizes, but at least it's not too bad. I mean, you can investigate it with black if you want, because b6 is also maybe a line which not every white's player knows really well. And but the idea is bishop b7, trying to get c5, and yeah, actually there is a move bishop f4. I think I was planning to play bishop e7 here. Also, yeah, not bulletproof, so to say, but I remember analyzing in 2001, I really was very afraid of a4 move. And because the idea is that in case of a5, white is playing bishop f4, and now, well, the quite a serious difference is that in many lines, when white is playing e6 and then taking on c7, you know, the b6 pawn becomes weak, and actually that is well, quite a serious problem. It's just hanging. So but maybe bishop, and if bishop e7, maybe white is starting to play a5, and again a bit difficult for black to, for instance, connect in rooks, and maybe you will get some issues on the a line. So all in all, yeah, for black it's playable, probably playable, but you need to analyze it if you really want to try this line. With white, for sure, I can tell you, play rook d1, and then maybe in case of bishop b7, I would recommend you to play a4, but also bishop f4. It's interesting. So finally, after all those moves, finally we come to the main line, nowadays modern main line, which is h5. Well, I can tell you the story that actually I've analyzed this move already back in 2000 when playing the match with Kasparov. Finally, me and our team, we were not so happy with knight e7, knight g6 line. We realized that this bishop e7, g4 is not so easy, this position, even if it's maybe holdable, but we are not totally sure. So then was checking all this move, bishop e6, g4, we didn't like also. So finally, I think Joel Latier, he analyzed this h5, he came to me and he said, you know, I cannot find any clear refutation of h5. But at that time, now everybody plays this like automatically, it's becoming a normal automatic move. But at that time, it was really a very revolutionary way of playing. It was really strange to weaken this g5 square so much, because I remember we analyzed with Joel the position. Of course, engines were pretty weak at that time, so you couldn't really rely on the engines, but we couldn't, somehow black always had enough resources or close to enough resources after h5, but I just couldn't kind of commit myself to play like this, because, this g5 square, you just play bishop g5, rook d1, and, this bishop on g5 is really bothering black terribly. You cannot develop. Changing this bishop on e7 it can lead to a strategically difficult position under some circumstances. So finally, I didn't play it. But then some years after, computers started to like it, and now it is the main line. And actually, it seems to be the theory here is enormous. You need really to know a lot of theory here if you are a professional player. And many of professional players, they know it, of course. It's maybe the most popular line nowadays in Berlin with black. And I think I played a lot after this line, a lot of games with more than once with Aranyan, maybe 3 games with Aranyan, couple of games with Vishan and with Michael Adams and other players. So all in all, the state of theory, I think black have always enough resources to equalize, but white has quite a number of attempts, and I will tell you now briefly what are the main ideas for white in this position. Here, in this variation, you really need to know a lot of direct lines. So the theory of this variation is developed incredibly, so many games that now here, if you want to play this line, maybe it is the safest one for black in Berlin. So it's, I think, according to theory, it's holding well, and many strong players are still playing it, like Karyakin, Grishuk, and many others. Nakamura, they play this line, but of course now I don't recommend you to play it if you don't know move per move all this theory. Bishop g5 and bishop f4 are 2 main moves. There are also some ideas of playing knight e2. For example, is also an idea, and strangely enough, for instance, b6 I think is an interesting move here already. You need really to know here the theory. I will not show you all those variations because you all have engines and databases, so you can check many games of strong players here. So there is enough of examples here. But that I thought after knight e2 b6 was the safest way, and probably enough to equalize, even though sometimes here the game can get very complicated. I remember I played this position with white against Malachov. And actually he managed to equalize. And another 2 different concepts. One is very logical, that white can put the bishop on g5. Then black usually plays bishop e6. At least now there is no knight g5. So once white has this bishop here, then he cannot play knight g5. And in case of knight e2, then he always has this idea of playing bishop d5. Somehow it works by tempest always. So white is playing rook d1 normally, bishop e7. And then, check, for example, my games with Aranyan and many other games. So black wants to put the pawn on h4 here. f6 sometimes becomes an idea. You still need to know quite some theory here, but I think that it's holding, at least since that time when I played it several games and I was doing well with black, always out of the opening, and also as a result, I think was ending in a draw all the time with very strong top players. I made many draws with black here and didn't really experience any opening problems. And I haven't seen the latest practice anyone who managed to put some serious problems for black here. But still, I remember Aranyan beating Karyakin a couple of years ago in this endgame, especially with this bishop g5 idea. So you need to be careful. You need to know it, but I think it's doing fine for black. And the most popular is bishop f4. Bishop e7, rook d1, and now you need to study all this theory, which is very, very direct. Bishop e6 is usually played. I think I've tried to put bishop on d7, but it's a bit strange just to play rook d8 next. I was not totally sure if it's the best move. I just wanted to avoid all this huge theory after bishop e6. But then in other games, finally, I played bishop e6. And now knight g5. Usually, actually, bishop g5. Normally, it's actually good. It's a good way for black to give up this bishop for the knight and have this very powerful bishop on e6. but it's normally good via this bishop before bishop takes c3 sometimes. Yeah, it happens that white plays b3 and with a rook on a1, black goes bishop b4, takes on c3 and then plays c5, and he is equalizing. But here black has a huge problem simply with connecting his pieces, his rooks, and here it's not recommended. White is better here. So that line would have been actually not playable if not rook h6, a very strange move which was found by computer some years ago, and there were a lot of games in this position, and still some games going on here. I mean, white is still trying from time to time to get something, but the theory is already very often goes up to move 40 here. For example, I remember Bashir, Lagrave, Karyakin game in St. Louis one of the years, few years ago, and I think they actually played like in 10 minutes 40 moves here, all out of preparation, and it ended in a very sharp draw. So here computer analysis and knowledge of the theory is very important, but in general I think it's holding. I even played with white this position once. So the idea is, for instance, 96 rook e6. Here, in general, this position, this structure is very good for white. If he would just be in time to get 94 g4, white would simply be better, but he's not in time. 94, there is tactically f6 works, and because ef doesn't work because rook takes c4, and then the bishop on f4 is hanging. And then black actually maybe wants to play g5, g4 also, and in case of g4 also it's a very, very concrete line, like take, knight h4, etc. And black is always in time, to create enough play to make a draw. So finally the best move is considered to be rook e1 here. And maybe actually rook d8 is holding. I'm not sure, but this position. But again, this strategically is very dangerous. I just need my c3, b3, g3, king g2, and white will be pressing for, till the rest of the game, and maybe actually have good winning chances, because here it's very important that black doesn't have any more two bishops. But again, it's very concrete. Yeah, c5, then maybe black wants c4, rook a6, rook b6, starts to bother the pawns on the other flank. I'm not sure if it's working, but the main move by Fa is bishop b4 now. Again, tons of theory after moves like g4. Lately, I think I discovered a3 move, which I played against Sergei Karyakin with white in the candidates tournament 2018. Got some pressure here, but very strange position. Bishop is taken on c3, bc3. Then there was later in the candidates of 2020 Ekaterinburg, there was a game Nepomniachtchi Grishuk, where Grishuk managed to get a good position out of the opening. So all in all here, if you want to play this variation with king a8, h5, some work is needed. But again, what can I say about this whole endgame? I believe it is, from at some point on, computers have changed their mind, because when in 2000 I used to work on it, actually Fritz, which was the best chess program at that time, it would assess this starting position actually after exchanging on d8. Let's say it's almost like +1 for white, because it really didn't like the double pawns. It was given a big assessment, a big like it's a big disadvantage. So it was a bit difficult to analyze, because I felt, of course, it's not so bad. It's definitely playable for black. But then when I would analyze it, it's always given +1. It was a bit difficult psychologically, always to go against the machine. I believe that now situation is a little bit different. I mean, we are on the other side of radicalism. So now very often computer says that it's equal almost after any move, any variation is 0-0 equal. I believe that it's not easy at all. I mean, that white has some tries, and it's not so easy to equalize with black. So I still believe that probably objectively, of course, it's a matter of taste, of your style, but objectively, I still believe that Kasparov was right when he thought that this is the best objective chance for white to get an advantage in all Berlin. And of course, there are still ideas which you can find. I mean, with both colors, and it's not so easy for black to fully equalize. So, and you see sometimes, there are some players who actually playing it very well with white. I can advise you to look at the games of Alexander Grishuk. I think he has very strong, very good understanding of this endgame. And he won quite a number of games here with white, playing extremely well, very, very precise. So he shows that this endgame is not easy at all. Also, quite many games was won by Maxim Vachier-Lagrave here with white. So interesting endgame. Very important is to the practice here is very important. I mean, it's difficult to get all the, even learning all the theory, using the engines. Still, you need to play a few games to get the feeling of this endgame, because there are lots of nuances. There is a kind of strange mixture of positional understanding, strategical thinking, and calculation. So you always need to justify your idea with a very accurate move order, and it should work move per move. But yes, all in all, I think it's playable. In general, I think black is probably objectively should equalize here. Again, I think it's not as simple as people believe nowadays, because at some point it's not very fashionable. Many white players, they try to play d3 on the move 4 or try to go for rook e1 line, because there is a general consensus that this endgame is very difficult task for white to get anything. Without a lot of work, yes, but I'm absolutely sure that if you make some work here, you can still pose at least practical problems for black. But again, objectively, probably black will hold always this position. So that was the Berlin. I tried in this limited amount of time, I tried my best to give my impression, to give you certain direction, certain structure of the opening theory, most of typical ideas. It is probably the most important opening nowadays after e4. That's why I was spend more time than on practically any other opening line in after e4, because I believe it is important, and I think hopefully I gave you a certain base of knowledge, of understanding of Berlin, the choices of different lines, so you can choose playing white, playing black, what you like more, but still some work has to be done. Of course, and it's a lifelong story. It's clear that Berlin will not be refuted. It's going to stay with us in the theory of chess for years and tens of years. So if you are e4 player or e4, e5 player and you are playing Berlin, it's better that you get ready to analyze it, to get a good understanding of this opening line, because one last thing that actually AlphaZero, after playing with itself and trying to understand from the scratch what is chess all about, trying to develop its own opening theory, finally after reaching the cosmic level of 3,800 or 4,000 rating. Anyway, who knows what is a rating, but it's definitely the best player existed ever. So finally it decided that against e4, this is the best opening choice. Of course, with a small margin. Also, other Ruy Lopez are fine and other openings, but finally it decides that with black it's playing Berlin defense because it considers it the best opening. So it is a serious opening. It's going to stay for a while, and I hope that after those 2 long lessons, you have a certain clear idea about this opening variation.